Was I a failure for not understanding this game? I mean, I don't know why I would be. It's not like everything needs to have a solution, but I feel it somehow. I feel like I failed, and I don't understand why.
Hello, this is a game called The Beginner's Guide. It is one of my favorite video games maybe ever. Certainly one of the most compelling and thought-provoking narrative experiences that I have ever had while playing a video game. I first experienced The Beginner's Guide while watching Jacksepticeye play it over 10 years ago. And ever since then I have found myself coming back to this game time after time and finding something new to talk about. And I think it is really cool that such a small little indie title like this has been able to deliver on such a layered and nuanced story. I'm going to take this time to talk about some ideas that I have taken away from my most recent playthrough of The Beginner's Guide. And if you have not played this game, or at least watched a playthrough, I really suggest that you do, and then come back to this video. I will link some great playthroughs and video essays in the description, but if you don't want to take the time for that, don't worry. I will do my best to go through the game linearly and explain the story as it happens. But I'm not going to worry about spoilers, and I'm going to assume that you either have experienced the game before or don't care. So this is your only warning. Without further ado, let's start at the beginning. The game starts off in a basic Counter-Strike map. You as the player are free to walk around and explore the area, all while the voice of Davey Wreden, the creator of the game, narrates and guides you through its experience. Davey is going to talk to you about his relationship with a friend named Coda. He talks to you about how Coda used to make video games, but that he stopped, and now Davey is releasing this collection of Coda's work as a way to reach out to him in hopes of inspiring him to make video games again. I find the beginning of this game to be really interesting to go back to after playing it. These levels do a good job at getting us ready for the types of games that we will be playing. They also get us used to Davey as a trusted and reliable narrator. He's taken on this role as our guide throughout this experience, and it's easy enough to trust him at first. We'll watch Coda's progression as a game maker evolve, and each level is going to become slightly more complex than the last, with deeper ideas and themes being explored. The levels are also going to get more abstract and surreal as the game goes on. It starts with a basic Counter-Strike map, moves to a level called Whisper, where you walk around a spaceship and your goal is to make it to the end to turn this generator off. Narratively, the biggest thing that I took away from this section of the Beginner's Guide is how subtly, yet effectively, Davey is already spinning an image of Coda into our minds. We don't really have much of a choice yet but to trust Davey, and no real reason to not trust him yet, but you'll notice that already on the second level of the game here, that Davey is making some alterations to Coda's original games. There's a maze in the middle of this level, and Davey decides that there's probably no real meaning to it, as well as it is too time-consuming to bother with, so he skips you right past it. He then goes on to modify the end of the level before showing you the true ending as Coda made it. Now in your first playthrough, you don't think much of these changes yet, especially since Davey always has some sort of justification for them. It was Coda's first real game, and he probably didn't know what he was doing, so Davey's just making small changes to make the game more palatable. But as he is doing this, Davey is also telling the player how Coda must have been thinking and feeling as he made these games. Throughout the Beginner's Guide, Davey is going to end up doing this more and more. But the trick is, he is subtly building up these narratives around Coda as the game goes on. These assumptions are going to start getting more and more direct. It'll hardly even be noticeable at first, and most first-time players will just accept them as truth. But pay close attention to these comments, as they begin to evolve throughout the game. When it gets to the end of the space station level, Davey states how Coda probably meant for the game to end one way, and that a glitch must have made it so it ended a different way. He shows the hypothetically intended way the level was going to end, before showing you the real ending. You accept this without a second thought, because that all makes sense. And again, Coda is a new and inexperienced game developer, so it is easy to imagine all of this happening. It's only after you played through the game and seen the ending when you notice a comment like this. The beam causes you to start floating, and this is an important moment for him, because yes, this is technically a glitch, but Coda identifies something human about it, like how small it makes you feel in the face of this larger chaotic system, or this floating could be the afterlife, a peaceful place juxtaposed against all the hysteria you just had to traverse. The way Davey is describing Coda's mindset here is very explicit, like he somehow has a window into Coda's mind as he was making the game. For a moment, Davey's comments have gone from hypothetical assumptions to concrete accusations. It's a small moment here, but it's important given what we know after playing through the game. And that's how the beginning of this game works. These first 7 levels each convey a unique idea, and Davey walks us through some of his perspectives as we play. In the interest of time, I'm going to gloss over these other beginning levels of the game, that being backwards, entering, stairs, puzzle, and exiting. I do this mostly because I want to focus on the narrative that this game provides. And although these levels are all great, the core of what I want to talk about is going to be more in the middle and later parts of the game. I'll quickly share a couple of notes that I have and a quick summary of each level, and we'll move on. The third level in the game is called backwards, as in you can only move backwards. Every time you turn around, a new message appears, and it feels like a nice little poem as you walk through the level. The next level, entering, is a short game where you walk down a path and pass a sign that says, "You are now entering." Stairs leads you to a room filled with unique video game ideas, but only after you climb a long staircase that slows you down the more you walk up it. The next level is called puzzle. It's a straightforward pathway with a puzzle that involves you having to close one door behind you in order to open the next one. Exiting is the same thing as entering, but instead the sign says, "You are now exiting." You'll see that Davey is making pretty significant gameplay changes to these levels, particularly in stairs and puzzle. First, in stairs, he allows the player to easily climb the staircase that is supposed to slow you to a crawl. Then in puzzle, he strips away the walls at the end of the level to reveal that the game has more in it than we knew. Davey is also still pushing some sort of narrative of Coda onto you as the player, particularly in ending and exiting, where he assumes that because these two levels are so similar, it is to suggest that every single game is connected. I do suppose that all of these games are connected, they share many themes and ideas, and we will see many aspects repeat themselves in different games, but the thing is that Coda himself never really intended for these games to be released or be public in any way. So when we say that these levels are connected, they're more connected in a way that entries in a diary or sketchbook are connected, rather than being direct sequels of each other. We'll talk about this more as the video goes on, but what I believe is important to recognize is that these levels were originally just passion products that Coda made because he found some sort of joy in making them. We can analyze these levels as pieces of art just like any other, and we can even take a guess on how someone making these games might have been feeling. What we'll be watching, however, is how Davey develops a parasocial relationship with these games and its creator. By the end of the beginner's guide, we'll find out that Davey himself is a deeply insecure and anxious person, and when he plays these games, he sees some part of himself in there that he doesn't like, which is fine. It's exactly what good art can and is often supposed to do. But Davey will begin to project these ideas onto Coda, and as we move forward with these levels, Davey's analysis becomes less about the games and more about Coda. He does it subtly, to the point that when you're first playing the game, it's hard to notice, and you kind of just go along with what he is saying. But as Coda explores deeper and many times more emotional topics with his games, Davey will start to directly connect these ideas with Coda as a person. This will set up an excellent rug pull at the end of the game that will completely shift your view of what you have just experienced. And these beginning levels of the game are an integral part of setting up that twist ending. Unlike the last 7 levels of the game, these next 4 I do want to talk about in more depth, these being Down, Notes, Escape, and House. These are my favorite levels of the whole game, and I feel like they have the most to offer in both their direct content as well as the narration that Davey provides. We'll see Coda explore new ideas in very creative and elaborate ways, and we'll also see Davey begin to talk himself and you into believing that Coda is developing in an unhealthy relationship with his work. Let's start off with the next level of the game, Down, or The Great and Lovely Descent, which I like a little bit better as a name. I would say that this is my favorite level of the game. It distinguishes itself in how it is the first level to be so fleshed out and complete compared to what we have seen until this point. It is longer, very noticeably so, and takes you through multiple abstract stages, with each stage presenting its own ideas that still seem to fit the theme of the level as a whole. You start in a large, flat, and blank world with a small building in the middle. It gives the vibes of a coffee shop, but you'll notice that there is no counter to actually order anything from, just chairs and tables. Davey starts by talking with us about game development and the source engine that Coda uses for his games. He states that the source engine is particularly good at making flat, boxy levels and corridors, and that's why many of Coda's levels are boxy and linear. He asks you to take note of this as you look at the architecture of the games that Coda makes. This is an idea that is then immediately flipped on its head as you enter the back room of the building and go down the stairs that lead you into a weird and abstract part of the game where you jump down these colorful shapes in a black void. You continue on downwards to these stairs that lead to a concrete building with a big open corridor that has prison cells lining the walls. A series of fences and gates leads you into one of these cells. Davey says that in the original game as Coda made it, you spent a full hour in the cell before being let out. He then goes on to explain how he and Coda would argue about whether a game should actually be playable or not. This is a point that I would like to take some time on, because it does offer an interesting conversation point, as well as a look into the mindset of both Coda and Davey. First off, should a game be playable? I mean, if you have the intention of actually sending this game out and having people play it, then yeah. If you're asking people to play the game, then it's important to respect their time as a consumer of your product. It is, however, important to note that Coda doesn't have this intention. Coda is just making these games because he likes making these games. In that sense, these games are entirely for him, and whether or not the games he makes out to actually be playable is entirely his decision. Coda sees his games as a form of personal expression. Davey sees them as uncompleted products. This leads us to Davey. As a player, you are relieved to hear that you are not actually going to be forced to sit in the cell for an hour. And as a person actually playing the game as a product, you are compelled to see Davey's point. The game has a lot to offer, and it would be a shame if the experience was brought down by a tedious decision like having the player sit stationary for an unreasonable amount of time. This sense of relief makes it easier to sympathize with Davey, and thus we're more inclined to agree with him and his points. After playing through the game, however, you realize that at the end of the day, this is not Davey's work to mess with. It is a project that wasn't even meant to be seen. And we find out that this whole time, Davey is actually going against Coda's wishes whenever he alters the games or shows it to another person, just like he is doing now. Of course, Davey doesn't tell you this at this point in the game, but this won't be the only time where he neglects to tell you important information. The level goes on to revisiting the door puzzle that we have seen earlier. We talk with some NPCs about the puzzle. One group desperately wants to solve it and break free. The other group finds comfort in the dark space between the doors. Then we end the level at a lamppost in a dark courtyard. Davey makes the comment that Coda starts to add these lampposts to the end of his games, possibly as a destination and endpoint to complete each one. As people have seen the end of the game before, we know that Davey is now outright lying to you as a player. Davey is altering Coda's games yet again and adding lampposts to the ends of these levels. This is important because from this point, or really at any point in the game, we can never really be sure of Davey's words and intentions as a narrator. As a player, we can never be really sure that what Davey is saying is true, or if what he is telling us is the full story. Let's move on to the next level, called Notes. It is a big open level that has all these bubbles scattered around that pop up little notes when you get close to them. The level starts off with a title card that would make the player believe that the bubbles you see have real notes from real people. Davey quickly assures you that they are not from other people. All of the notes are left by Coda, and then we are free to read as many of them as we want and explore the level. This level does not have much in terms of gameplay going for it. You're pretty much just walking around looking at these notes and listening to Davey. To be fair, that's pretty much the whole game, and both the beginner's guide as a whole and this level succeed despite this lack of expansive gameplay. You'll notice that this level feels a lot bigger than it really is, because you spend a lot of time going around reading the notes. This sense of exploration is present throughout the entire game. Even if it should only take a minute or two to progress through a level, it usually always takes longer than that, as you check every corner and appreciate every detail. That's how you know that this game really succeeded at making these levels each feel like a personal project. You'll also notice that Davey often takes a step back from narration and lets you go through certain parts at your own pace, seeing everything for what it has to offer, as you make some of your own opinions before Davey states what he thinks. Another thing that I wanted to talk about when it came to notes is how Davey comments that this level feels lonely. Personally, I feel like this level is vibrant and expressive. Davey, however, makes the argument that this level is Coda talking to himself through his work, using his games to express feelings that he otherwise can't. The thing with that is that working through complex emotions and expressing yourself in your work is simply a part of the creative process. This happens for both the creator of a piece of art as well as the audience as we take in this meeting. We'll see this happen as Davey himself is starting to form these connections with Coda's work, and this is the level where we really see Davey be so explicit about his own emotions in a way that is hard to notice until you finish the game. Until now, Davey has been relatively calm with his analysis, focusing on the game and Coda's development as a game maker. Starting here is where we will start to see the parasocial relationship between Davey and Coda's games start to form. This makes sense within the story, as Davey states that this is actually the first game of Coda's that he played when the two met at a game jam.
I saw him working on this very level, and it was just so different from anything that anyone else was doing. So right away I was like, I have to be friends with this person. In retrospect, I think I was probably a bit too pushy trying to get his attention. I was over-enthusiastic. But he was very gracious about it and very patient with me. And I cooled off eventually.
I want to take a moment to commend Davey's voice acting in both this quote and the whole game. The subtleties present in his enunciation make it easy to mentally skip past parts of this comment on a first playthrough, and then on a replay, you notice how problematic this comment could be just based off his voice acting. Notes it's a significant level in the story of the beginner's guide. Davey admits here that when he plays Coda's games, he not only feels like they are a reliable way to learn about Coda, but that he actually prefers this way of connecting with Coda, and implies that he probably has issues connecting with people in real life.
But it's ironic, isn't it? That in playing this game and seeing how alone Coda often felt, that we get to know him better and actually kind of connect with him. And I have to be honest with you, this idea is really seductive to me. That I could just play someone's game and see the voices in their head and get to know them better and have to do less of the messy in-person socializing.
From here, we can see how Davey formed such an unhealthy obsession with Coda and his work. The relationship was built from an unbalanced foundation. Davey vies for Coda's attention, not because of who Coda actually was as a person, but for his work. And as Davey began to befriend Coda, he formed a much deeper connection with Coda's games rather than the human behind those games. The level then leads us to the door puzzle again, and then to the end of the level where the lamppost sits in a room of typing typewriters and a voice asking us to speak. Davey will go on to explain his view of the puzzle, and for what it's worth, his interpretation of the puzzle and its significance makes enough sense. The idea of Coda using these puzzles as a way to move on from one idea to the next fits with the theme of the puzzle having you close one door in order to open the next. The only caveat that I would bring up to this is that we have no real way of knowing how much Davey has tampered with any of these works. We find out at the end of the game that the lamppost at the end of each level is put there by Davey. But given how much emphasis Davey puts onto the door puzzle, I wouldn't say it would be too much of a leap to assume that he put it in many of these levels, or that at least he made it play a more significant role in the game. However, this is just speculation. The next level, Escape, is most interesting to look at once you have finished playing through the game, which, fairly enough, we've been assuming this perspective throughout the entire video. In Escape, Davey takes us through multiple different stages where we see Coda explore this idea of making a game based around a prison decorated with modern-looking furniture. Coda takes some time to fully realize a version of this game that he's satisfied with. He starts having a simple hallway that we walk down, and Davey flashes us through a bunch of different abstract iterations that Coda has tested out. Coda is again going through a different part of the creative process. Revisions and restarting works that you aren't completely happy with is a natural part of creating something. You gain a sense of satisfaction once you are finished with something that you truly believe is a good product, and there's a sense of dissatisfaction when you aren't quite there yet. It can be a frustrating process to work through, and at times it can even affect your emotions, but we're going to see Davey take this whole idea to another level. Davey is going to suggest that Coda has some sort of abnormal problem, and he's going to make comments like this.
Personally, I think it's awful to watch this, to see a person basically unraveling through their work. And for what? Like, at what point do you just go, maybe there are game ideas other than this prison that I could be working on? But Coda doesn't have that voice telling you to stop, that particular mechanism of defense against yourself. Without it, you just spiral.
We don't know if Davey realizes it at this point or not, but in hindsight, we can assume that Davey is projecting some of his own insecurities through the games that Coda makes and onto Coda himself. I'm not going to say that an artist cannot unravel themselves through an obsession with their work, but here it's not really Davey's place to make that assumption on Coda, especially as someone who has begun to take a particular obsession with Coda's work that seems to oversee his real-life relationship with that person. A likely thing that is happening here is that Davey is subconsciously referring to a mechanism within himself that he lacks, one that relates to regulating your emotions and actions to live a more balanced and healthy life. By the end of the beginner's guide, we'll see that Davey does lack some sort of restraint to control himself from doing things even when he knows that they are wrong, like altering and sharing Coda's work against his wishes. The level ends with a version of the prison that Coda seems happy with. The prison does not actually appear in this level, and instead you are free from the prison, and you find a payphone where you talk to another version of yourself who is still trapped in the puzzle. At the end, it's a simple and vulnerable conversation that helps you escape the prison. I can see why he considers this a fitting conclusion to the prison games. After all the obsession and frustration, to just be told by someone you trust that things are going to be okay. Wouldn't that be nice? The next and last level that we'll talk about in such depth is pretty simple and is called House, as in it takes place in a house. The gameplay is you walking around this fancy, modern-looking home as a caretaker as you complete simple cleaning tasks. As you do this, you're having a really nice and calm conversation with an NPC in the dining room. It's actually funny how engaging this level is despite its simplicity. Conversations are something that I think video games can especially excel at. Giving you the option to dictate how a conversation goes, even if the choices are limited, can allow for a more raw experience than other mediums. The conversations in the beginner's guide do a great job of feeling authentic, and you walk away from this level feeling like you gained something real. This is another level where by the end of the game, we learn that Davey is altering the level from Coda's original intention and lying to you about it. In the level that Davey presents to us, the cleaning chores do a couple of loops, and eventually the conversation in the level ends. We walk up the snowy hill and exit into an area with a lamppost. Davey even makes this comment at the end. But of course, it can't last. The music stops, your companion is gone, it's time to leave. Your door at the top of the hill is now open as well. Again, you can't stay in the dark space for too long. You just can't. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive. In the original game that Coda made, the chores don't end. It just loops endlessly. And if the chores don't end, then we can ask the question how the original conversation with the NPC went. Did it end? Was the NPC even put there by Coda? Have any of the NPCs we've seen been put there by Coda? Davey's entire narrative is in question here. He's even offering an interpretation to a version of the game that he himself made up, and yet he is still placing these ideas onto Coda as a person. This hyper-analytical version of Davey that seems determined to dissect Coda's mind through his work is the version of Davey that we'll see is present in the next 4 games before we get to the final levels. Like earlier, I'm not going to go into quite as much depth for these last 5 levels as I did for the last 4, particularly now because I feel like this section of levels share a lot of similar ideas, and the game is leading us down a hole where we assume that Coda is falling deeper and deeper into depression relating to his work, but of course, this fall down an emotional hole is more related to Davey than it is to Coda, but that won't be revealed until the last 2 levels. Again, I'll make sure to share any points that I feel like were important in this part of the game, as well as give you a simple overview of each level so that you're not lost if any important details come up as we near the end of the game. There are 5 levels here that I'm going to go over. The first level is called Lecture. You take part as a student listening to a professor or otherwise accomplished individual give a lecture on how to be perfect. The level then flips your perspective to the presenter, and the dialogue choices lead you to find that the presenter is a lot more insecure than we might have been led to believe. Also in the background is a giant black hole, as well as the lamppost. The next level is called Theater. You are in an audition of some sort, and the director is directing you to reenact a time that happened in their life when they had an opportunity to meet with a professional in the director's desired profession of animal photography. After failing to realize the director's vision, they order you to walk to the back of the stage as large gates begin to fall down, separating you from the stage. Mobius is pretty simple. You are on a spaceship that is facing imminent danger from a large version of the door puzzle, and in order to save the ship, you have to meet with an individual by a lamppost and tell the truth. Island is the opposite of this idea. You are jumping from different islands in a blank world as you converse with an omnipotent voice. You guide the voice through the door puzzle, and in return, they tell you how to find a machine that you're looking for. You are looking for this machine because it is the power behind your ideas. The solution to finding a machine is that you must lie about the creative process being fun and enjoyable. The last level we'll talk about here is called Machine, where people are upset with the machine named Coda, as it has stopped doing what it is supposed to do, and thus seek to destroy its work. This is the point where Davey tells us that he has began to show Coda's work around to other people. These games share a lot of similarities, and we'll see that Coda is expressing what is yet another part of the creative process, writer's block. This part of the creative process can be one of the most draining parts of creating a piece of work, and these levels do a great job at visualizing the frustration that comes from trying so desperately to come up with good and great ideas, and yet feel like you're hitting a wall. It's a part of the process that doesn't get as much attention because of how personal it can be. You often feel like that you have no one to blame but yourself, and it becomes a cycle of stagnation. This is represented excellently by these conversations between the player and NPCs that repeat themes of how the creative process is getting harder and harder as the conversations and subjects of the levels get more and more destructive. Davey sees this in Coda's work, and we see that Davey takes an unhealthy obsession with the idea that Coda is in a deep bout of depression. Fairly enough to Davey, he has mentioned throughout the game that Coda's mannerisms in real life have reflected these ideas. When making these closed-off games, Davey comments that Coda himself is also closing himself off in real life. Still, even with this, Davey has been known to lie throughout the game, or at the least not have a full grasp on emotions and behavior. The only concrete thing we can be sure of is that Davey has some sort of unhealthy obsession with Coda in his work. We will also find that Davey himself probably struggles with mental health, and when he plays these levels again, we notice comments like this, which shift from seemingly being about Coda to possibly being really about Davey. You can't talk yourself out of loneliness. It doesn't work that way. You can't be the one writing both the questions and the answers. Then there's no movement. Then there's no circulation. On a first playthrough, it is very easy to have followed Davey's perspective on Coda throughout the experience. For most first-time players, you really do believe that Coda is having serious problems and that Davey is doing the right thing when he tells us that he decided to share Coda's work with other people. He justifies how this would help Coda feel more confident in himself. But throughout this process of sharing these games, we only see how it makes Davey more confident, especially since many of the games he shares are altered versions of Coda's original work. That's what makes these next two final levels hit so hard. You expect some big revelation to happen relating to Coda and his mental health, but instead the script gets flipped, and we finally get to see how the events of the beginner's guide were really playing out. These last two levels of the beginner's guide play like a conversation. The first one here, called Tower, being a conversation between Coda and Davey, and the last level of the game, called Epilogue, being a conversation between Davey and himself. Tower is the last game that Coda has made. It comes after Davey has started to share Coda's work. We see the level take on a more abrasive style of gameplay than we have seen yet. None of the puzzles are really meant to be solvable. An invisible maze, a random code, an unlockable door. It's only after someone gets through these puzzles, someone who would modify the game, where we see Coda's final words to Davey Wreden. At this point, Davey has just admitted to modifying Coda's games at various points. He does this in a casual way, right before we see Coda's messages, so that it is still setting in when we actually read Coda's words. Coda's message tells us even more. It describes how personally invading Davey has been, how Coda specifically asked him not to show his games around, and of course, the alterations and the lampposts. Davey begins to break down as he realizes the effects of what he has been doing. This happens as we continue reading Coda's words. They go on about how Davey has been going around telling people that Coda is depressed without really knowing, and that Coda can't stand being around him anymore. Davey has done such a good job of putting us into his shoes that we feel the devastation of this message, as well as the confusion that arose from realizing that we were being lied to for so long. This is really a part of the game that I feel like you need to experience yourself. Davey's voice acting really sells that he is a broken man in the midst of realizing that he has more to work on than he knew. I describe the tower as if it's been some big reveal, but the truth is that the level plays more like a confession. Our whole experience of the game is turned inwards, and instead of learning more about Coda, we learn about Davey and ourselves. If the tower is the shock of such a revelation, then the next level is the grief. The tower ends with the player trapped in the dark space between the doors of the puzzle, and the walls are closing in. Davey takes a massive step back, letting you come to terms with what has happened and what it means. Epilogue is the level that ends the game, and it does so with this cathartic sort of level design that gives you the time to come to terms with the game and put you in the shoes of Davey as he processes the consequences of his actions. Tower was the last level that Coda made, making Epilogue the level with the most clarity that we have seen in the whole game, the assurance that everything here is made by Davey. Davey leaves halfway through the level, so you really are just walking through the scenic environment, going through a train station, a house, or dark cavern, all to end by walking to the generator from the Whisper level. Notably, this level is the first time that we know that Davey made an alteration to Coda's game. The final moments of the game have the player floating into the air, just like Coda originally made it. But as you rise, you see this labyrinth sprawl beneath you that stretches almost incomprehensibly into the horizon. Overall, The Beginner's Guide is a story that seems to grow the more you learn about it. There's a lot more conversation to be had when it comes to this game, and I apologize if I skipped over any topics or levels that you wanted to see talked about in more depth. I hope that you gain new perspectives on The Beginner's Guide and a new appreciation for one of my favorite video games.